This video is really just my attempt to make sense of what's going on right now, because I sure as hell did not have Tom Scott promotes extreme bigot on my list of things I expected to happen in the final days of 2021, yet that's exactly what happened. What's even worse, however, is the way in which Tom Scott royally messed up his response to the rapidly growing controversy, not only telling us that he knew about the problem before he published the video and yet chose to ignore it, but also by failing to acknowledge the extent of the harm caused by his decisions, as well as a number of other things. Though before we can delve deeper into all that, I first need to give a content warning for the following topics: transphobia, antisemitism, homophobia, ableism, fascism, physical assault, photos of physical harm, child sexual assault, suicide, and prison. If you like our work and appreciate the research put into each video, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, and today we'll be taking a look into just how bad Jill Bearup's transphobia, homophobia, ableism, and antisemitism is. Now, the original plan was to cover all of that before doing a breakdown of Tom Scott's response in a single video, but the deeper I dived into Jill Bearup's depravity, the more I began to realize that that would not be possible. I'd either have to cut out key elements going over what Jill Bearup has done, or I'd have to do an incredibly short section on Tom Scott, and neither way felt right. Therefore, this video will focus strictly on Jill Bearup, allowing me to reference said materials in a second video which will focus on the events regarding Tom Scott. All you need to know for now is that Jill Bearup has never apologised for what I'm about to show you, let alone attempted to make any sort of amends. On top of that, Tom Scott is not only hiding Jill Bearup's bigotry with no mention of it in the video's description as of the day I recorded this video, seemingly hoping nobody will click the link to his shitty addressal, but he's still linking to her channel, both at the end of his video and in the description. He is sending unwitting trans people, lesbian, gay and bisexual people, autistic people and Jewish people to a transphobic, homophobic, ableist anti-Semite. And as a trans, bisexual, autistic person, this is not something I can just ignore. So with that noted, the best place to start is with Jill Bearup's defense of fascism in her 2017 article titled, "If you strike them down, they will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." The bulk of said article involves Bearup criticising the idea that it's okay to punch fascists. Why? Well, because the self-declared gender-critical movement, formerly the self-declared TERF movement, is an extension of British fascism. Not only does the vast majority of their funding come directly from far-right organisations, groups that have pledged to destroy abortion access and LGBT+ equality in order to bring about a Christian theocracy, but the gender-critical movement in the UK uses those resources to promote Islamophobia, anti-black racism and anti-Semitism, alongside their regularly scheduled demonisation of trans, gay and bisexual people. Indeed, the hero of Jill Bearup's article is a notorious transphobe with a history of trying to whitewash British fascism, Maria McLachlan, or she's known online, Skepticat. In one of McLachlan's fluff pieces designed to improve the public's image of British fascism, McLachlan proclaims in no uncertain terms that, quote, "I currently feel able to defend the EDL's stated objectives from the charges of racism and fascism," end quote. Whilst acting like the EDL's image problem is simply the result of a few bad apples. Now, why does that sound familiar? Back in reality, the EDL, or English Defence League, is an incredibly xenophobic and entirely fascist movement in the UK. Kinda like the British answer to the Proud Boys in the US, minus the access to firearms. That piece is still public, by the way, since McLachlan feels confident enough in the narrative surrounding her, a narrative that people like Jill Bearup have helped build, that she doesn't feel the need to hide her support for white nationalism. That's how normalised fascism is in the gender-critical movement in general, because it itself was born from it. Not that Jill Bearup's article will admit to that fact, with her instead implying like it's impossible for a cis woman to be a fascist. Yeah, there's a lot wrong with this article. Though it's from this angle that Jill Bearup constructs her main argument, building the narrative that trans people, particularly trans women, are all violent aggressors attacking innocent cis women who merely have concerns about proposed changes to British policy. Jill Bearup starts by giving a very selective account of events that occurred in Hyde Park in September of 2017, during which an anti-trans group clashed with human rights protesters, an event that Ms. Bearup frames as 4 transgender activists descend upon a sweet, innocent 60-year-old woman, brutally mugging her. What did she leave out, besides the fact that McLachlan was a known fascist? Well, the fact that McLachlan was pushed over as a result of her choking someone in a headlock, dragging them about 10 feet away from their group, before violently shaking them with the help of a friend. So let's roll things back to the very beginning. Stonewall pulls out of a debate against a group of transphobes when they realise just how bad faith the people they are going up against are, only for 2 venues, the main venue and the backup, to cancel on said transphobes. As a result, both the transphobes, including McLachlan, as well as the human rights group who turned up to protest the event, moved to Hyde Park. Once there, both groups kinda separate into their own little corners, chanting back and forth for one another, which is when we have video. Note, I'll be using 2 videos to show what happened due to both of them missing key things at various points. I've also gone ahead and mirrored a copy of both videos so you can check them out. So as people are chanting at one another, McLachlan peels off from her group and begins approaching the human rights protesters, recording them as she does. In response, a trans woman, Tara Wolfe, breaks off from her group and attempts to slap the camera out of McLachlan's hand, failing to do so before Tara retreats behind her group. McLachlan then decides it would be a great idea to continue to approach the other group, pushing her camera mere inches from people's faces whilst being told to stop and back off. One individual even raises their cardboard sign to block McLachlan, who at that point is barging her way into the group. The group responds by trying to push her and her camera away, which breaks out into a scuffle, with the transphobic group rushing forward to join in. That scuffle lasts mere seconds, yet in the chaos, nobody notices McLachlan grab one of the trans people in a headlock before she begins dragging them back towards the transphobic side, whereupon her and one of her friends begin violently shaking this random trans person. The human rights group does eventually notice that one of them has been taken, at which point a number of them, including Tara Wolfe, rush forward to free said person, during which McLachlan is pushed to the ground. Both sides separate and things quickly quieten down once more. Now, there's a few things of interest I'd like to point out here, things that aren't noticeable in the video but rather the audio. The first is members of the transphobic group laughing as everything happens, talking nonchalantly about recording things as Venice Allen, the woman in the red coat who organised the event, yells, "Hit him."
Yeah, keep filming.
The next thing I'd like to point out is the way in which, in spite of McLachlan having yet to pull herself off the ground, Venice Allen pivots on the spot, begins walking away, calmly declaring that she's calling the police. No apparent concern about McLachlan, nothing.
999. Call the police!
And there you can see McLachlan lifting herself up off the ground, after Venice Allen has already walked off. Reminder, Ms. Allen was the organiser of the event and thus should feel responsible for the people present, but she just doesn't care. Her calls to hit him were about taking advantage of the situation to hurt a trans person, not helping McLachlan. Because everybody's expendable under fascism, yet nobody following it thinks that refers to them specifically. It's one of those really twisted elements to the whole thing. And it's both of these things, the laughing and the way Venice Allen reacts, that reveal what this entire show had been about. The transphobic elements were setting out to provoke a response so that they could turn around and use it to reinforce their transphobia. In a domestic setting, this is something known as reactive abuse, and whilst there's no interpersonal relationship involved here, it's still a tactic applied by oppressing forces. If you prod enough marginalised people for long enough, someone is going to snap, and you can use that to justify the initial oppression, thus creating an endless feedback loop. The whole thing was a setup, and there's literally no way to win in such a situation. the transphobes would simply continue to escalate things until they provoked the desired response. So you either allow yourself to be harmed or you're punished for taking a stand. Now, Tara Wolfe was charged with minor assault. However, it's worth mentioning that the judge presiding over said case refused to grant McLachlan any compensation, stating that, quote, compensation would not be appropriate, particularly due to the unhelpful way in which the victim was present at the protest and the way she was filming. She was asked at different stages not to film, but continued to do so. End quote. So even by the ruling of an incredibly transphobic judicial system, McLachlan very clearly provoked things. I mean, you don't get to barge into a group of people protesting you and expect nobody to react. And no, someone slapping your camera is no justification to assault a completely different person. Hell, it's not justification to assault anyone. If you're actually afraid when someone slapped your camera, you'd withdraw from the situation, not advance. It's not like McLachlan's rights are at stake here, as they are for trans people. We also got to hear Miss Wolfe give her motives for what happened, with her stating that, quote, TERFs have a history of taking people's pictures and posting them in pages like genderidentitywatch.com, a database that makes us a target for the far right. It made me feel threatened because I have heard what TERFs have done in the past. They take people's pictures, they put them on the internet, and they dox, publish personal details about them. They've even been known to put people on paedophile watch websites. End quote. Now, I imagine Ms. Bearup would deny these claims, seeing as she enjoys hanging around one of the places known for doing this, Mumsnet. But the fact is, this is something that defines the movement she was a part of. Just take Venice Allen, the event's organizer and someone Ms. Bearup promoted in her article. She was known for her stalking and harassment of trans people, especially trans youth, via her online persona, Dr. Radfem. Ms. Allen has no actual degree as far as I'm aware. Fact is, Ms. Allen, who was 43 at the time, would only continue to get worse, with her going on to target and harass a teenage MP, Lily Madigan, shortly after Ms. Bearup published her article, with Ms. Allen making public comments about driving Lily to suicide. Her harassment of people like Lily was so unrelenting that even the British Labour Party was forced to take action. They expelled Ms. Allen from the party after she posted threatening images targeted at Lily to Twitter. It's also probably worth mentioning the fact that mere hours after the incident in Hyde Park, Ms. Allen took part in not only physically assaulting a trans person of colour, but also using sexual violence, a fact that was never widely reported. Why? Well, because violence against trans people, especially trans women of colour, is seen to be the normal and thus acceptable state of the world. It is the very same status quo Ms. Bearup lies to defend, a world which enables not only physical violence against a marginalised community, but sexual violence. And it's that sort of trans misogyny that Ms. Bearup's ideology thrives on. Transphobes can present themselves as being peaceful when really they're the ones instigating and escalating the violence. As you might recall, following this whole thing, Linda Bellos and a bunch of others penned a letter for The Guardian titled "Violence Has No Place in Transgender Debate," in which she does just that. However, she speaks very differently when she's surrounded by her fellow transphobes. Note, I am playing you the extended clip since I don't want people claiming this to have been taken out of context. Ms. Bellos is very clear in that she's talking about resorting to violence as a response to the political and academic ground being gained by trans people.
Was very, very struck. In fact, I got a note today from a trans woman whom I know. I can't remember what she said to me, but something. I said she, because I want to be respectful, that she's very hurt by what I've said. And I asked her a question about race, because it seems to me that one of the categories that human beings, and actually men, came up with the notion of races. The categorisation of races seems to have been created around the time of gender being created. And I remain, it's very funny listening to some of the rubbish that's being said about what chaps do, because I must say that having born 2 children, I think I'm physiologically and in any other senses a female and actually a woman. But I play football and I box. And if any one of those bastards comes anywhere near me, I will take my glasses off and drop them. Anyway, yeah, I take my glasses off. I take my glasses off and I leave. I can't see anything. That's not the point. Not to take one. It's not the point. But I do. I'm quite prepared to be to threaten violence because it seems to me that politically what they're seeking to do is piss on all women. That's what they're doing for their personal gratification. There aren't many of them, but what really offends me is the extent to which academia and political parties have listened to them in a way that they're not listening to us as women. And if any one of those bastards comes anywhere near me, I will take my glasses off and drop them. Anyway, yeah, I take my glasses off. I take my glasses off and I leave. I can't see anything. That's not the point. Not to take one. It's not the point. But I do. I'm quite prepared to be to threaten violence because it seems to me that politically what they're seeking to do is piss on all women.
Ah yes, gender was invented around the time of the notion of races. That's why one of the earliest colonial projects enacted by the British Empire and other European powers was the eradication of trans people found throughout indigenous cultures worldwide. Because that makes total sense. Thing is, Ms. Bellos is not being threatened here, she's not being provoked, she was talking about an overly polite letter she received from a trans woman trying to reach out to her humanity. That's what enraged Linda Bellos, that's what led her to encourage violence against a marginalised group whilst laughing. Because fascists have the exact same outlook on political violence as they do free speech. The whole, fine for me, but not for thee. And since it apparently needs to be said, there is a chasm of difference between resorting to violence as a means of subjugating the oppressed and resorting to violence as a means of resisting it. Trans people are not taking anything away from cis women, that is just a pure up myth. One which Ms. Bearup is more than happy to promote in her article when she tries to pretend that the issue here is self-ID and its impact on women's spaces. Quote, gender self-identity. If you say you're a woman/man, then you are a woman/man and can have the gender recognition certificate to prove it. No diagnosis of gender dysphoria or action on your part is required. You're a man/woman now. And you and your vulva are entitled to access male-only spaces, and you and your penis, and beard if you feel that way inclined, are entitled to access female-only spaces. You know, changing rooms, prisons, sports, toilets, that sort of thing. End quote. Except the GRA reform that was being discussed at the time had absolutely no impact on any of these spaces. The GRA reform only discussed making it easier to receive a gender recognition certificate, which is needed to change one's birth certificate, tax forms, marriage certificate, and pension forms. Private documentation, that's all. As for access to women's only spaces, those things are already guaranteed under the 2010 Equality Act, which specified that no blanket ban of trans people could be issued for single gender spaces. Each case had to be reviewed as such, an individual case, which is something domestic violence shelters and rape crisis centres already do. What's more is, as a trans person without a gender recognition certificate, you can legally update the gender marker on any of your ID, such as your passport or driver's license, through self-declaration, making it impossible to police trans people's access to these spaces. Your birth certificate is not proof of identity. You're not expected to carry it around, at least not at the moment. We've not quite reached the papers please stage of fascism that people like Ms Bearup are working towards, in which a guard will be posted outside of every toilet. Point is, the concerns forwarded by Ms Bearup and the people she's promoting are invented whole cloth. Why? Well, they're trying to prey on the transmisogynistic trope that declares all trans women to be sexual predators. Something Ms Bearup further elaborates on by stating, quote, "Go ahead and beat the women who are concerned that gender self-identity could mean that any violent man can just say he's a woman, walk into female-only spaces like changing rooms, and be legally okay to do so." End quote. Quote, "Go ahead and punch women who are concerned that a double rapist, that is to say someone who non-consensually stuck a penis into, in this case, a 13-year-old girl and a disabled 15-year-old girl, is deserving a sentence in a woman's prison, penis and all, because, you know, they have a certificate saying they're a woman, with a penis, which they have non-consensually stuck into vulnerable young women. I'm sure everyone will be totally on your side. They deserve it, those nasty lesbians and feminists and transsexual women with their ridiculous concerns about women's safety. Ugh, who cares?" End quote. And she was still at this more than a year later, as seen in this comment posted to YouTube during 2018, in which Ms Bearup added, quote, "The women of Mumsnet, at least the ones who frequent the feminism board, the third largest board by traffic, are furious. Because Karen White, a paedophile and literal child rapist, was transferred to a woman's prison because Karen is a trans woman and in under a week had committed 4 sexual assaults on female prisoners. This is not even the first example of this exact thing happening. It's the most recent and well known. To give you some context on that last one, the average number of sexual assaults in female prisons in the UK in a year is about 12, somewhere between 12 and 15, I think. Thanks for screwing up the statistics with your penis, Karen." Incidentally, Karen White has fallen for raping a woman in a hospital ward. End quote. I don't know where Ms Bearup is getting her statistics. All I do know is that prior to 2002, in spite of only making up 6% of the prison population, women's prisons accounted for 12% of all recorded sexual assaults in prisons, a number that has since decreased, equalizing with male prisons in spite of the number of trans women increasing. References provided in the transcript are links below if you'd like to check things out for yourself. Point is, female prisons are not some utopian paradise free of sexual violence. Cis women rape people. Myself and my brother were both raped by a cis woman inside a domestic violence refuge. But, in Ms Bearup's mind, all cis women must be pure in their actions. Ms Bearup's attacks also ignore the fact that 47% of trans people are victims of sexual violence, and that being forced into male spaces as trans females is a big part of the problem. Vicky Thompson was a trans woman who had been in and out of care her entire life, had already been raped whilst inside a male prison once before, and warned multiple people that if she went back in one, she'd leave in a box. After Vicky was caught shoplifting, they put her inside one anyway, and shortly after inmates began slipping her notes, telling her that they'd come to rape her in the night, she was found hanging in her cell, having taken her own life on the 15th of December 2015. Again, she was charged with shoplifting. This made her the third trans woman to have had her life extinguished by the state in this manner in the past 18 months, and another trans woman would be pushed into doing the same less than 3 weeks later. Yet Bearup denies trans women and trans femfolk our basic humanity. She instead reduces us down to a penis and uses that to paint every single one of us as a rapist in waiting, a predatory man lying to gain access to cis women. Bearup judges every single one of us guilty by extension of us being trans, since she can point to a single trans woman who is a rapist, a standard she does not apply to cis women. Because her rhetoric is not about actually fixing the problem, it's about presenting trans women as inherently dangerous, reinforcing the transmisogynistic trope, rather than question why sexual violence is so common in prisons to begin with, something that can actually help all prisons. Ms. Bearup sets out to demonize the LGBT+ demographic that suffers the second highest rates of sexual violence. And it's easy to see why Ms. Bearup does this. She's building on decades of anti-trans violence laid down by the fascists before her. This is a thumbnail taken from an interview with McLachlan, in which she proudly displays her copy of Janice Raymond's The Transsexual Empire, The Making of the She-Male. Said book is infamous for being the primary source of the covert rape myth, the idea that a trans person not declaring their trans status upon meeting someone, especially cis lesbians, is tantamount to rape. But it gets worse than that, for you see, Raymond and those who share her beliefs hold to the notion that the very existence of trans women is rape, with Raymond declaring that, quote, all transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the real female form to an artifact, appropriating this body for themselves. Transsexuals merely cut off the most obvious means of invading women so that they seem non-invasive. End quote. So our very existence as trans femfolk is taken and presented as sexual violence. That has been the dominating doctrine of said movement since the 70s, and it shows no signs of going away. It's why Bellows reacted to a trans woman sending her a heartfelt letter with fantasies of punching us. So anytime a person like Ms. Bearup talks about ending male violence, think about what they are including in that statement, or more specifically, who they're including. What's more is, following the publishing of said book, the US government hired Raymond as their sole expert on the topic of trans people, using her subsequent paper, which contained absolutely zero research, to justify removing medical transition from the list of essential medical treatments. This meant US insurance companies could now deny access to said healthcare, destroying the lives of countless trans people living in the US, a legacy of medical violence that continues to this very day, which is why Ms. Raymond is so venerated by people like McLachlan. That's why she is displaying this book. It's a symbol. She wants to kill us. So unlike Ms. Bearup, who has chosen to be a bigot, we did not choose to be born into these systems of violence. Our continued existence is reliant on us fighting to defend ourselves, something that Ms. Bearup can't say about her hateful little crusade. Another thing that's important to note here is the fact that the narratives used to present trans women as dangerous did not spring out of nowhere. On top of recycling homophobic talking points like those seen during the gay teachers panic, the idea of trans women as loud, violent and manly entities invading the spaces of white cis women relies on rhetoric white nationalism has perfected over centuries of anti-black racism. Nobody's femininity is put under scrutiny as much as a black woman confident in herself. That's why so many of the people targeted with accusations of being trans at, say, the Olympics are either black or dark South Asian, because racism is an essential part of gender gatekeeping in the West. A reality that means trans women of colour suffer all the more. It's not just trans misogyny they have to deal with, it's misogyna. Which brings me to the resulting impact of Ms. Bearup's transphobia, and that is the normalization of violence targeted at a marginalized group. By constantly presenting trans people fighting to survive as an existential threat to white cis women, Ms. Bearup is imbuing certain people, especially white cis men, with the privilege to engage in violence against us on sight. Ms. Bearup is tapping into benevolent patriarchy in order to give said men an acceptable target to vent their misogyny upon. To beat a woman whilst pretending like they're actually protecting women. a chance to live out their violent fantasies fueled by trans blood. This is how you force a 332% increase in anti-trans hate crime over 5 years. This is how you get men to assault trans women in the middle of brightly lit restaurants for daring to exist in public. This is how you get people to slam the faces of trans teens into concrete floors or pull a knife and slash them across the face in public parks. This is what Ms. Bearup was aiming for when she wrote her article. This is the narrative she helped build. This is the resulting fallout for trans people throughout the UK. Because whilst Ms. Bearup gets to move on and act like nothing happened, we have to live in constant fear of the terror she helped empower. But it's not just transphobia that Ms. Bearup is reinforcing, she also enables homophobia, as seen in this quote taken from her 2018 comment. Quote, "Because they're lesbians who have been told by Stonewall that one of their campaigning aims is the elimination of single-sex exemptions from the Equality Act, single-sex exemptions being quite important for rape crisis centres, prisons, and indeed gay saunas, though I don't suppose those are of so much interest to lesbians." End quote. Again, we see the lie about single-gender spaces, though oddly enough, Ms. Bearup mentions the Equality Act, which ruled the exact opposite. Something that has entered legal precedent. But what I'm really interested in here is that last statement about gay saunas and how lesbians, unlike gay men, probably aren't interested in them. She's just straight up implying that gay men are more promiscuous and voyeuristic than lesbians and by extension cis women, something that is attached to so much of the violence targeted towards gay men, said prejudice being a significant contributing factor to the AIDS crisis. It's also incredibly misogynistic in how Ms. Bearup is once again promoting this notion that cis women fall into this very Christianized archetype of sexual purity where they don't engage in public sex and they most certainly never engage in sexual violence. Yet the homophobia continues, with Ms. Bearup stating that, quote, "Because they are lesbians who have been told by Stonewall that same-sex attraction is transphobic, vagina fetishist, for pity's sake, I don't think the person who coined this phrase understands what a fetish is." End quote. This was never happening. What actually happened was transphobic bigots started attacking trans-inclusive lesbians, trying to police their identities when nobody fucking asked. In this, their transphobes not only erased trans lesbians, but the majority of cis lesbians by telling them that they can't really be lesbian since they're willing to have sex with trans women, the implication being that trans women are really men. There's also a lot of biphobia here involved with the notion of gold starring and the idea that the act of having had sex with a man decreases a woman's worth. Again, this isn't simply like fascism, this is fascism. Returning to trans people, however, when this was pointed out, said bigots started arguing that, well, a lesbian is defined as someone who is only attracted to vaginas, reducing women down to being nothing more than a walking vagina. It was also at this point that some wonderful people began noting the fact that many trans women have vaginas. In fact, so amazing is the neo-vagina in how similar it is to the natal vagina that when they're not disparaging us, gender-critical folk admit they can't tell the difference between the two. So much so that they've gone ahead and developed phrenology-style checklists as a way to discover whether the person they're sleeping with is actually trans, right down to her curly butt hairs, which apparently no cis woman has. If this sounds familiar, that's possibly because the far-right super straight movement would go on to do the same thing. After all, what does super straight stand for if not straight butt hairs? Point is, by now it's become pretty obvious that the issue isn't one about genital preference or even appearance, it's simple transphobia trying to pretend like it's something else. What's more is, no self-respecting trans person wants to sleep with a bigot. That's a path that leads to us being on the receiving end of both sexual and domestic violence. But when people like Ms. Bearup are out there trying to police the identities of cis lesbians based on the fact that they love trans women, that's not just transphobic, that's entirely homophobic. That is actual lesbian erasure. And since we're on the topic of policing, do you want to know who is impacted by attempts to police gender? I mean, besides trans folk and people of colour. If you guess lesbians, then you'd be right. For you see, lesbians and queer women in general are less likely to dress up stereotypically feminine. Not because of their gender or sexuality, but because of pre-existing stigma. When society is already giving you crap for who you are, you tend to care less about other social expectations, such as gendered norms. It's the same reason LGBT+ folk are more likely to be open about their involvement in the fetish and kink scene. It's not because we're all sexual deviants like Ms. Bearup forwards, the internet results from porn sites do not lie. It's because once you've learned not to give a damn about the puritanical standards of society, that allows you to be much more honest with yourself and others. It also means cis queer women are more likely to be targeted with violence whilst entering toilets because, as already noted, bigots can't tell who is and isn't trans. This has led to a number of instances, especially in the US following a string of policies seeking to exclude trans women from women's bathrooms, in which cis queer women have been targeted and even assaulted under the assumption that they are trans, because homophobia and transphobia are interconnected. Not that a person has to be a queer woman to be targeted. Amy Toms is a cis woman who grows her hair to length before cutting it so she can then donate said hair to charity. Specifically charities that provide wigs for child patients of cancer. Well, shortly after cutting her hair, she was targeted while shopping inside a Walmart. As Amy washed her hands and got ready to leave the store's toilet, another woman came in and began harassing Amy, following her and telling her that she was disgusting and that she didn't belong here, assuming that she was trans due to her short hair. And it's for precisely these reasons that such narratives are so popular with the far right. Not only does it act as a way to hurt trans people, lesbians, and queer women, the hysteria surrounding trans people gives them a way to effectively force all cis women back into traditional ideals of femininity out of fear of harassment and even physical violence. Because no cis woman wants to be treated the way trans women are. So it's used as a way to, once again, teach women their place in society, and that is something Ms. Bearup openly supported. Which leads us rather painfully to Ms. Bearup's ableism, with this particularly heinous remark being found in her 2018 comment. Quote, "Because they were autistic girls with dysphoria and are a bit horrified at the idea that you can choose to sterilize yourself at the age of 18 with cross-sex hormones, because they definitely would have." End quote. Bearup is just straight up telling us that she believes autistic adults should be stripped of their bodily autonomy, our human fucking rights, for no reason other than our autism. This is her treating autistic people as subhuman whilst acting like she's doing it as part of some benevolent desire to protect us. Well, as an autistic person, allow me to be the first to tell Ms. Bearup that she can take her shitty ableism and fuck right off. Like, I have tried to be as cool-headed as possible during this video, but I just can't anymore. What she's arguing for here is just straight up monstrous. It's not simple demonization, which is horrific in its own right, but this is the outright demand that a group be stripped of their bodily autonomy because Ms. Bearup doesn't like how said people use it. It reminds me of the bullshit pulled by some doctors who tell cis women, including lesbians, that they won't perform a hysterectomy on them just in case their future husband wants to have children. It is just straight up misogyny due to how people with wombs are perceived as women who need to be controlled. Except in the instance of trans men and MB folk with autism who want to pursue medical transition, because let's be real, that's who Ms. Bearup is targeting here when she talks about girls with dysphoria, making this argument incredibly transphobic as well. HRT is a life-saving treatment. To be absolutely clear, that shouldn't need to be the case. A person should have the right to consent to whatever medical treatment they want, whether it's life-saving or not. And yet, Ms. Bearup is trying to justify stripping trans men and MB folk of access to life-saving treatment on the ableist assumption that people with autism lack autonomy. Newsflash, we don't lack autonomy, we're denied it by people like her. Now, the reason she's trying to exploit prejudice towards autistic people specifically is because there are more autistic people in trans circles, proportionally speaking, and vice versa. This has led some to assert a causal link, declaring that autistic people are being preyed upon and indoctrinated into thinking they are trans. After all, autistic people are known to be more likely to engage in rigid thinking, and that must mean they're more likely to adopt gender stereotypes, leading them to believe that if they enjoy something typically associated with the opposite gender, they too must be that gender. Except that argument fundamentally misunderstands what rigid thinking actually means in regards to autistic folk. It doesn't mean they're easy to indoctrinate, rather the opposite. Autistic people are more likely to be analytical in their approach to new concepts, requiring evidence and logical reasoning above all else. Only once they've come to accept a belief on the basis of these things does it become difficult to get them to abandon that belief without further conflicting evidence or reasoning. For example, if you've reasoned with an autistic person all their life in order to get them to understand that stealing from others hurts said people and that we shouldn't steal since society operates on a basic degree of trust, a system which breaks apart when people violate it, they are more likely to stick to that standard than autistic people. This is not a hypothetical, by the way. Autistic people are less likely to steal for precisely this reason, a fact that led researchers to admonish said phenomenon as moral inflexibility, since it made it harder to teach autistic people to exploit others under capitalism. Though I actually first came to know about this not in relation to trans people, but the fact that autism is also overrepresented in atheist circles, something that certain religious apologists try to use to argue that atheists are mentally ill or defective, and that's why they don't believe in God. The reality, meanwhile, is that there's no evidence-based arguments for God. Most people simply adopt the religious beliefs of their parents, yet autistic people are less likely to do so. And wouldn't you know it, preliminary science has shown that autistic people appear to be socially resistant to binaristic cis-normative conditioning, with one paper stating that, quote, "The finding that non-binary identities are most elevated seems to support hypotheses focused on autistic resistance to social conditioning, which are consistent with existing evidence of the same effect with respect to self-description of sexual orientation. Perhaps elevated rates of trans identity in autism might result from a rejection of the binary cisgenderist norm, which combined with a below typical concern for social norms could promote the disclosure of the identity." End quote. To clarify what they meant by elevated, the study found that 94% of autistic trans people in its sample were non-binary. So the idea that autistic people are easily led astray flies in the face of everything we know, relying entirely on ableist attitudes towards the neurodivergent that assume we are all incompetent. Another myth you might have heard is the 90% desistance myth, the idea that 90% of all children diagnosed with gender dysphoria later show no symptoms. Yeah, that's not true either, at least not in the way it's typically presented. You see, the Dutch study being referenced quantified signs of dysphoria not by clinical assessment, but by referral, including referral by untrained professionals. All that means is that someone, such as a parent, school counsellor, or teacher, refers their child to a gender clinic due to the possibility of them being trans. That's what the study meant by gender dysphoria. Once there, said children were assessed by trained professionals who concluded that 84.2% of said referrals either weren't trans or were and simply didn't require further support, so sent them on their merry way. Now, let's just stop to think about that for a second. Ms. Bearup would have you believe that there is a system brainwashing young girls and even adult women into thinking they are trans men. Yet in reality, we know said system sends away 84.2% of all youth willingly sent to them as not requiring any further support. What's more is, the same team published a qualitative analysis of their findings, revealing that there were key differences between trans youth and cis youth simply exploring their interest. Differences that could be used to accurately predict which children would benefit from puberty blockers and later HRT. That's why out of all the teenagers who were put on puberty blockers, 100% went on to hormonally transition with no known regret. That level of satisfaction is next to unheard of in medicine. For comparison, according to a meta-analysis of 138 separate studies, the satisfaction rate for knee surgery is around 66.3%, meaning that 33.7% regretted pursuing knee surgery to some degree. Yet I don't see Ms. Bearup out there protesting knee surgery. That's because she doesn't actually care about regret, since trans people are not simply acceptable collateral as some transphobes might want you to believe. We are the targets. If it doesn't hurt trans people, they do not care. A fact also seen in how puberty blockers were developed for cis children, and yet nobody batted an eye. Said medications only came under hyper-scrutiny after their potential to help trans people was realised decades later. Though speaking of conspiracy, things continue to get even worse. For you see, Ms. Bearup is not only resorting to ableism in this argument, she is also falling back on antisemitism in order to pass it off, something we also see in her 2017 article. Quote, "It doesn't include the right to beat a woman who disagrees with you, and it doesn't include the right to hand out sterilizing drugs to and perform double mastectomies on gender non-conforming 13-year-olds. Come on, Texas, sterilize your teenager with testosterone." End quote. First things first, no 13-year-old is being sterilized. What is happening is some trans youth are being given fully reversible puberty blockers. As already mentioned, these are clinically tested and medically safe medications that were originally designed for cis children suffering early onset puberty, but were later adopted to help trans children by extending the time they have to reach an informed decision about HRT by about 4 years. This puts most of them beyond the age of full medical consent in the UK, which is 16. Once those blockers are removed, puberty resumes as normal, making use of whatever hormones are present in the body, be they natural or synthetic. There is no evidence that they have any adverse effect on future fertility or anything else for that matter. All we do know is that they save lives, leading to a 60% decrease in moderate and severe depression and a 73% decrease in suicidality among transgender and non-binary youth. What's also important to point out, however, is the fact that the trans community at large supports trans people not needing to medically transition. Each trans person's journey is different, with some trans people not wanting to or being unable to medically transition. Now, compare that to the comments read out during the Transphobia section, where Ms. Bearup derides trans women who have not undergone reassignment surgery, drawing attention to their penises and acting as if an unwillingness to undergo surgery is proof that they're lying about their gender. Keeping that in mind, I have to ask, which of us is actually pushing for the sterilization of trans folk as part of the expectation placed upon them to prove their transness? Sadly, the narrative that white girls and even white women, as Ms. Bearup argued, are being brainwashed and subsequently sterilized as part of some transgender craze has become a prominent element of the white genocide conspiracy. That is, the anti-Semitic belief that Jewish people are engineering the destruction of white Europeans. This particular variant argues that a Jewish shadow state is secretly influencing politics and pharmaceutical companies in order to push trans diagnoses onto white girls as a means to decrease fertility rates, thus weakening white Western civilization. And members of the gender-critical movement are more than happy to name names, as can be seen in this series of tweets posted by Magdalene Burns from 2016 to 2017. Quote, George Soros, the money behind the transgender movement. End quote. Quote, Soros on the listed sponsors of the EU trans lobby, by the way. End quote. Quote, mate, the EU transgender lobby is funded by Soros, Stryker, and the US State Department. End quote. Quote, Open Society, Soros, Arcus, John Stryker, gender ID ideology is not even a little anti-establishment. End quote. George Soros and John Stryker are of course both Jewish investors. Fact is, Magdalene Burns was one of Ms. Bearup's primary sources in her 2017 article, specifically in relation to the Hyde Park incident. And as we've just seen, she was not discreet about her anti-Semitism. This is not something Ms. Bearup just missed. This is something Ms. Bearup either supported or decided was an acceptable viewpoint, as she helped legitimize Burns's talking points about sterilization. So that's what now? A white nationalist, a sexual predator, and an open anti-Semite, all of whom Ms. Bearup forwards as morally upstanding people who are merely concerned about the Jewish shadow state. Sorry. I mean the existence of trans people. Sorry. I mean bathrooms. Trans women peeing in women's bathrooms like they have been for more than a decade. This narrative, this idea that a Jewish cabal is stealing white girls away from those deserving of them, is a key component of European fascism for a number of reasons. First is the already touched upon notion of reproductive livestock. This is when members of the far right reduce everyone assigned female at birth down to their reproductive capabilities, acting as if their happiness and general well-being is inconsequential. All that matters is the individual's fertility, since that ensures the nation's strength. This is why people like Ms. Bearup talk non-stop about sterilization as if that's the most tragic thing a person can experience. Meanwhile, people like myself talk about saving lives and defending bodily autonomy, because a woman, at least in Ms. Bearup's worldview, only matters as far as her use as a breeding vat, which I guess is why Mumsnet was such a perfect breeding ground for this sort of ideology, since if your only value comes from your ability to pump out babies, well, you may as well go online and celebrate it. Another reason is the notion of sexual livestock. Fascists, particularly younger individuals, believe that if they fight on behalf of their ideology, they will be rewarded with a sexual partner who will meet their every whim. Now, traditionally, this only refers to allo-cishet men, but seeing as the gender-critical movement has a small battalion of far-right lesbians, not the first time by the way, the same offer has also been extended to them. That is why people who have escaped the gender-critical ideology note the fact that prominent voices in the movement promise to personally help them find a wife if they moved to a different country and did well in spreading the gospel. This is why Ms. Bearup talks about 13-year-olds on puberty blockers being given mastectomies, even though one of the things puberty blockers prevents is breast tissue growth. Ms. Bearup is sexualizing minors by giving them phantom breasts, presenting them as a resource that the Jewish shadow state is stealing from everyone else to try and elicit an anti-trans uprising. And she's not alone. At the time Ms. Bearup published her article, groups like Women's Place UK and various individuals online had a history of showing photographs of trans people at their meetings. If they were trans women, they'd of course deride them out of disgust, calling them men and fetishists. Yet if they were trans men, including minors, they'd bemoan the wasted or lost sexual experiences. This is a narrative that has become so normalised in gender-critical spaces that a British barrister speaking at an anti-trans hate conference felt comfortable enough in stating the following.
Up and down the country and around the world, girls are removing breasts that have never known a lover's caress.
Once more, this reminds me of misogyny in medicine, specifically the disaster that was the Save the Boob campaign that elevated non-sentient mammary tissue above the lives of breast cancer victims. Because that is exactly what people like Ms. Bailey and Ms. Bearup are doing regarding trans men and AFAB MB folk. As for the sexualization of minors and the treatment of people perceived as women as both breeding and sexual livestock, I hope to fucking God I don't have to explain why these things are wrong. Though it's a little hard to tell these days, seeing how we as a society have once again normalized the Nazis. Speaking of which, the anti-Semitism seen in Burns's and Bear's posts has become much more prominent in the last couple of years. One example of this can be seen in Helen Joyce's published book, Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, which names not only George Soros and John Stryker, but a Jewish trans woman, Jennifer Pritzker, as a member of a global agenda. The triple parentheses are practically oozing out of the page at this point. Then we have people like Kelly J. Keane Minshall, aka Posey Parker, the person responsible for the Woman, Adult Human Female, and the I Heart JK billboards throughout the UK, talking about Gillick competence, implying that it might have been the first step towards dividing children from their families.
So, I'm particularly unhappy about that ruling. However, there are other routes to win this. So, my idea from now on is that maybe we need to repeal Gillick, or we need to re-examine. I just think Gillick is a law that was made for a really good reason. It was to stop pregnancy. So it was to stop quite a catastrophic, massive thing. Bringing another life into the world is not something that should have ever been allowed to be used anywhere else at all. And maybe it was a first step in dividing children from their families. I don't know. I don't know actually if all said and done, whether it's really a good thing. I don't know who's what other people have benefited from Gillick, but I'm just not comfortable with it. I think it really has been used badly here. Maybe it was always going to. Maybe the thin end of the wedge. There's always a thin end of the wedge. There's always an unintended consequence. Maybe this is that we have decided that children really can consent, and I don't think they can. And I think actually we need to find other ways to stop teenage pregnancy.
Gillick, of course, is the medical standard that declares a minor has the right to consent to medical treatment so long as they demonstrate a comprehensive understanding. It was first implemented to ensure teenage girls had access to hormonal birth control. I have a more detailed breakdown of that, including how the so-called feminists are relying on anti-abortion lawyers if you're interested. Point is, dividing children from their families is barely better than destroy the family unit, which is another catchphrase of the white genocide conspiracy. And even major parties are engaging in this style of rhetoric, as can be seen in these clips taken from the Conservative conference last October.
It's a sign of how bad things are, that some of the pushback against this kind of madder trans agenda stuff, which, by the way, all teenagers are now getting brainwashed with, which is just happening, and I can see it happening now, was by using gender-critical feminists as basically a human shield, because there's no conservatives who will go out there and use the conservative argument against this. We have to use other progressives to fight it. That makes me very pessimistic. In some ways, this is a kind of battle between, like the ruling class are basically international now. They don't really have, the period of the great national loyalties is in huge decline and has been since the time of the First World War. And there were just economic reasons to do that, to do with the global English, to do with the internet, the global economy. And so the nation thing becomes a kind of like minority opinion. And that's why the Conservatives, increasingly are more of a working class party. But they are set against the kind of ruling class. And that's a very difficult agenda to pull off. So, that's my basic thing, is that you're fighting against like most well-connected, most well-educated. You go to any elite institution these days, including the top public schools, and they are woke, to use that horrible word.
Do you know who also talked at length about a global elite chipping away at national loyalty during and following the First World War? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't Charlie Chaplin. And just in case you think I'm reaching, I'd like to remind you of the fact that the majority of the books used by the Nazis in public book burnings came from the Berlin Institute of Sex Research, one of the first places to offer trans people gender ID and early forms of HRT. Said institute was declared a Jewish front intent on bringing down the German people. It was subsequently raided for its literature, whilst many of its members were thrown into concentration camps under the Pink Triangle. So again, the gender critical movement isn't like fascism, it hasn't been co-opted by fascism, it is fascism. The pseudoscientific term rapid onset gender dysphoria is simply the newest rendition of blood libel. That is the widespread belief during the Middle Ages that Jewish people were stealing, sacrificing, and even eating white Christian children. And the impact of such normalization has been horrific. Alongside growing bigotry, the idea that young girls are being brainwashed by a Jewish shadow state was directly responsible for 3,000 trans people losing access to their medications towards the end of 2022. Thankfully, that was resolved. However, the High Court of England and Wales ruled that trans people under the age of 18 could not consent to medical treatment on their own, and that under 16s couldn't consent within the provisions laid down by Gillick competence the very next year. To be absolutely clear, the age of full medical consent in the UK is 16, yet trans people under the age of 18 would have to seek legal permission to undergo puberty blockers, HRT, or surgery, all on the unfounded claim that young girls are being brainwashed by a Jewish state. Thankfully, that ruling has also been overturned as a violation of trans people's human rights. That's why Ms. Keane-Minshall was talking about repealing Gillick, but it is terrifying that such a ruling ever came to pass in the first place. The British trans community is terrified in regards to everything that is happening right now because the narratives Ms. Bearup has helped prop up are being used to enact violence upon us in real time. All of this, the transphobia, the homophobia, the ableism and the antisemitism, not to forget the racism and misogyny that is woven throughout everything, is something Ms. Bearup has normalized through her work. And while she might like to slither back into the dark in regards to her part in this matter, that's a privilege we in the trans community do not get. We don't get to move on. We're the ones who have to prepare ourselves for the possibility of turning to grey market alternatives as access to trans healthcare via the NHS is slowly being choked. We're the ones who have to talk our friends down from the edge every time the British media launches a new stage in its ongoing hate campaign. We're the ones left to try desperately to get people to see the transphobic movement for everything it encapsulates, since nobody else will. Just personally, every time someone like Ms. Bearup and the people she supports launch their latest attack, I get hives, scaly blisters over the backs and sides of my hands due to the sheer level of stress we're being put under. And I live in India, but I'm still connected to the UK trans community. The plan was always to return to the UK one day, but honestly, with everything going on, I don't know if that'd be safe. And that's in light of the fact that at the start of this year, I was singled out and sexually assaulted in Calcutta for being trans. Yet I honestly cannot say that the UK would be safer for me right now. That's the level of terror trans people are having to live with, a fact Jill Bearup helped ensure. So considering all of that, I have to ask, why does Tom Scott feel like it's appropriate for him to continue to promote Jill Bearup whilst acting as if the harm she helped inflict upon the trans community is ancient history. Now, we will be taking the time to delve deeper into Tom's response, but I hope this video has at least shone a light on the issue for a number of you. I imagine many of you, as with me, didn't realise just how deep Ms. Bearup's well of bigotry was. It's like an endless fucking spring, a wholly depressing fountain of shit. And that's all I have to say. There's no positive here. So yeah, if you appreciate what we do here and want to help out, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make all this possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Hannah Banghart, Gerrit Van Voorst, Cthulhu, Higgins the Seagull, and Flynn. And for myself, Adita, and Levi, take care now.